Okay, well, we are here, everybody. It is the morning of the first NBA final that the Knicks will be partaking in since 1999, when I was 4 years old in change. I am excited, I'm nervous, I'm all the types of emotions you would figure for somebody who has never really witnessed the Knicks play in the finals. And I hope that you're feeling the same way, because this is special and this is something that it's probably easy to say right now, because once we get into the thick of it and once we start dealing with the highs and lows and the stresses of the NBA finals, there will be emotional reactions to things. But I do want to get it out of the way. And like I said the last time we talked Knicks, be very appreciative of where we are. And I don't think this should, win or loss, stain what happened this year. Regardless of what happens, whether the Knicks go out there and win, whether the Knicks go out there and lose, whether the dog stops barking upstairs, we should be coming out of this eventually looking back at it as a positive. And again, I do apologize if you can hear that obnoxious noise in the background. But the Knicks are here, man, and I'm excited. And so I decided to hop on here for a few minutes before I head to work. Now, this is not going to be some full-fledged, gigantic NBA Finals preview, but I do want to give some quick thoughts. I do want to give, what I think could be things that lead to the Knicks' success and maybe things that could lead to their demise. I do want to get some of that stuff out there, and I do want to talk about it in this episode here, because these are two teams with some history, man, and obviously the last time the Knicks were in the finals, they played the Spurs and they did not win. But they have since, played them in a cup final and they defeated them there. So that was kind of interesting as a little bit of a foreshadow, and hopefully it was. So I kind of just want to dive right in. I don't really want to waste too much time here. And I think, you can call it the elephant in the room, whatever you want to call it, but a big, talking point, and it's been a talking point all season long. The first thing I want to bring up here is, basically how the Knicks offense is going to attack this Spurs defense. Because I think everybody by now, as we are, 90-something games into the season here, everyone expects the Spurs to play the coverage that we've seen teams play, where they will cross-match, and they will put Wemby on Josh Hart, where Wemby is going to be able to roam as a help defender, and he's going to be able to load up toward Jalen Brunson's side. He's going to try to muddy up the half-court offense. That's what we've seen. So I think the key question for the Knicks is, when they do that, who will guard Karl Anthony Towns? It's going to be a small or a wing. If it's Castle, that impacts the Brunson matchups elsewhere. If it's Devin Vassell, the Knicks could potentially exploit that matchup. But what happened the last time these two teams played, when the Knicks lost against the Spurs back in March, the Spurs cross-matched Hart and Cat from the opening tip. And, the Knicks struggled, as you'd expected, very badly in that first quarter, because you saw what happens when that happens. And, the Spurs were just funneling possessions toward Josh Hart. Late clock possessions with no flow. The half-court offense completely stalled. Hart was hesitant offensively. And that's what happens when Hart is hesitant when he's cross-matched instead of being aggressive from three. Now, as the game went along, especially in the second half, you did see things start to improve when the Knicks pushed the pace. Hart got out in transition with them. And so the Spurs, because of that, were unable to set up their help schemes. And that's a way to beat that. Play in the full court game, avoid the half court. But, you're going to eventually need to play half court basketball. And I think the important part of how the Knicks are going to handle that is Josh Hart taking the open threes that Wemby gives him when he plays in this drop coverage or whatever you want to call it off of him. Take those open threes every single time. If you got to take 12 like you did against Cleveland in that game too, do it. Because that's the formula. Make enough early, take enough early, and if you start making a few, you hope that forces closeouts. Because if you start doing that, if you start taking those threes, sometimes it's just instinct for an NBA player to start closing to you. And if that happens, that's when Josh Hart really can get into what he likes to do. It opens up his drive game because now the defender's coming toward him and he can get into what he wants to do, drive and spray or drive and finish. And it creates more offensive rebounding opportunities. If Josh Hart is taking those threes, you got Smalls outside of Wemby. Cat can take that. But that's the thing. I just wonder how extreme it'll go. And does it get to a point where Mitch Johnson adjusts? Or does Mitch Johnson play it like we've seen Joe Mazzulla play it, where he's like, I'm just going to keep living with the Hart threes. Even if he's making them, I'm just going to keep living with them because I know it's not the most sustainable thing in the world. And it's not an offense the Knicks want to resort to. It's a lower value offense for the Knicks. The Knicks are kind of playing into their hands in a sense if they do that. So how can they really counter that help? I think when you're in the half court, outside of just shooting threes with Josh Hart, you got to move around. Use Hart in movement off the ball, off cutting, relocations, Iverson cuts. Things like that will force very quick decisions in the heat of the moment. And that's going to create miscommunication between Wemby, between De'Aaron Fox, between Castle and Vassell. And use Josh Hart as a screener, similar to what the Knicks did against Cleveland. Use him in pick and roll, get Wemby into action. So Hart's shooting matters not just because it creates closeouts, but also because the Spurs, again, they're relatively small outside of Victor Wembanyama. So Cat can dominate the offensive glass. Instead of just saying, oh, look, Cat's got the small because Hart's got Wemby, let's just post Cat against the mismatch. That's like the very go-to cliche old school opinion. You're big, post the small, use your strength. That's not going to work in this series because you've got Wemby roaming in help. Cat's got a wing. He's got a small on him. You don't want to post that because Wemby's right there. There's no space. He's sitting in help waiting for it. So if Hart starts making threes, maybe the Spurs are forced to close harder. Maybe it does open Josh Hart's straight line drive game. But I also think a way to avoid these cross matches is to literally avoid them by playing Mitchell Robinson. And that's when Mitchell Robinson's health comes into play. Now, hopefully the finger is okay. He says it's fine. It looked like we avoided worst case. But playing Mitch Robinson is going to help because now Mitch is the 5. Mitch is on the floor. He's automatically always going to be 5. So Wemby has to stay attached to him because Mitch is such a major offensive rebounding threat. He has that gravity. So that's going to keep Wemby away from those help responsibilities, which is what the Knicks want. And that's especially important because, again, the Spurs are very undersized outside of Wemby. Their smalls are small and their wings are barely wings. But when Robinson's on the floor, You use him close to the basket, and you, of course, want to use him in pick and roll with Brunson. The Brunson-Mitch pick and roll has been one of the more high-efficient, high-volume pick and roll combos in basketball. So you use Mitch in those pick and roll. It's going to force Wemby into the action. It's going to prevent him from being everywhere else defensively. Now, somebody like Wemby, he's not a guy who's going to show high. He doesn't come all the way up on the pick and roll. The Spurs don't want him doing that. Now you combine that with the Spurs' very aggressive perimeter pressure. They like to press at the half court when the Knicks come up. That could create those pull-up opportunities for Brunson to walk into. Right? You got him dropped. You use Mitch in a high screen. There's your space. Brunson walks into a pull-up. Point of attack defender's behind. Wemby's dropped. And then if Wemby shows, let's say he does show high, well, now one of the better roll men in the game, one of the better rollers, Mitch Robinson can roll right past the high coverage. The roll becomes available. But if he's dropped, Brunson gets the pull-up space. Now, I also think you can let Josh Hart initiate offense. If the Spurs are heavily pressing at the half court, let Hart handle some of those point guard duties. Double big lineups are, of course, going to be big. Going to be important. Keep Wemby occupied. Keep your offensive rebounding a strength. And, of course, a conversation from all season long for really the past 2 years has been playing those 5-out rotations. Because the benefit of that is now you're literally forcing the Spurs to guard you traditionally 1-5. And that's going to open your Brunson Cat pick and roll game, which is really what you want to go to. Force Wemby on Cat. There's your offensive switch, or there's your drop coverage, however they decide to play it. Brunson gets his opportunity. Cat gets his opportunity. Pick and pops open off of that. Boom. Now, I do expect to see 5-out a little bit like we saw against Cleveland. But against this matchup, it could make you potentially weaker on the glass, and you might need Josh Hart's defense in there against somebody like Castle, even Harper, who can be very physical. So that's basically it on the Josh Hart front and the cross-matching front. I also do think, though, the Knicks are, of course, you want to put Wembanyama into action. You have to remember, De'Aaron Fox is not the largest, best defender. And overall, again, the Spurs don't have a ton of size. They don't have a ton of wingspan. So at the point of attack there, the Knicks have stuff to exploit. Right? You look at Castle, you look at Vassell. Can they really consistently bother Brunson? Fox is somebody you can hunt. Now, I think they're going to start Fox on Mikal Bridges, so that just means you use those Brunson-Mikal pick and rolls. Right? Mikal comes up to set the ball screen, get Castle, get Vassell off, switch Fox on, and there's your matchup. Now, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about leveraging Mikal Bridges' gravity. Who's had a really good postseason. He shot the ball well. And when you're playing a team like the Spurs and they've got smalls like they do, and it's someone like Fox who's going to be on Mikal, I'm assuming. Well, if you got Brunson on the ball and you got Bridges one pass away, let's say he's on the corner on the wing, they're going to cheat toward Brunson because of his scoring gravity. Brunson's really good at reading help, and so he'll make those corner hits. And Mikal Bridges gets that shot off. De'Aaron Fox is very small. He doesn't recover to the corners particularly well. So that's something they can exploit. I heard that on a podcast the other day. I thought that was a very good point. But that's your offensive stuff, and on the defensive end, it's going to be tough. You know, the Knicks have shown, and they've proved for a while now, they are one of the top defenses in the NBA. They have shown that right since January. But the Spurs will go to those pin downs for Wemby. They will spam those actions. So I would look out for that. You know, the potential concerns there is if Brunson gets involved, because it's going to be tough for him to stay in front. And the Knicks aren't likely going to switch that. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on, because I'm not worried like individual defense defending Wemby. I'm not concerned about pure isolation defense. The Knicks have that. They've got OG. They've got Mitch. They've got Cat even. And if it's OG on Wemby to start, that's a strong individual matchup that I think he can live with. The problem with that is now Cat, you got to figure out what you're going to do with him, because he's either going to be on Champagny or maybe Vassell. And the concerns there are Champagny's a really good movement shooter. He can pull up in transition. We saw that. Remember that game. And, you know, he will go to those guard screens to put Cat in action. Now, if you've got Cat on Wemby, I think the benefit there is it allows OG to roam and help, which is arguably his best defensive role, right? When OG is in help like that off of a non-threat or lesser threat, he's able to disrupt actions and create turnovers and blow up possessions and stunt and leave the first side, go to the second side. He can just be that guy. The concern there is Wemby's screening, because the Knicks won't switch that. So their smalls are going to have to navigate those big screens. And then when you're talking about those Wemby pick and rolls, when he runs those with Castle on the empty side, that's another very difficult action to guard. The help side tag becomes a lot tougher. You know, you got Castle handling, you got Wemby screening, you got a shooter on the weak side corner. Now your low man is probably going to be a small in that scenario. And you got someone like Castle who off the pick and roll is really good at making those hook passes, those cross-court skips. So maybe you counter that by putting Cat on Castle. You switch the action. You take away the roll. You take away the drive. The risk there is now Castle's a very physical player. That's more of a risk for Cat to be put in foul trouble. I think that I'm not overly concerned about them hunting Brunson individually, but it's those three-man actions that do concern me a little bit. I think Brunson can handle the Fox switches, the Castle switches, the Vassell switches. A little bit concerned about Dylan Harper, but it's those three-man actions. That's a major concern, because you remember the last time these two teams played. That's how the Spurs were able to come back against the Knicks and torch their defense last time. They ran a lot of those three-man actions in the fourth quarter. Granted, this was with Cornette out there. I think this was one of those games where Wemby wasn't fully healthy and he was restricted minutes-wise. But if they run those three-man sets, that's going to be tough. Like those Spain actions are one, but also, yeah, like those stack pick and rolls where you have Castle as the ball handler, you've got Wemby as your primary screener roller, and you've got Champagny as your back screener. You know, I guess you can switch that, right? Where Brunson's onto Castle, Castle's defender's onto Champagny, and then the big drops below the screen takes away the Wemby role. I think that the main takeaway defensively is listen, there is no perfect strategy to defend this alien, but you want to live with his perimeter jumpers. Right? That is something that you can say, excuse me, it's something that you could say, okay, if he's going to make a 35-footer, live with it. We got beat. Right? So those are just some of the defensive strategies that I think the Knicks can employ when they're put into these situations. I don't know. It's going to be tough. Going back to some of the offensive priorities for the Knicks, I'm expecting the Spurs to pre-switch constantly just to keep Wemby out of action. And how do you avoid those pre-switches? How do you avoid those scram switches? You play faster. You get into offense immediately, and you don't allow the defense to reshuffle. If Cat's got the small, post the small. If Cat's got the big, go directly to your Cat Brunson pick and roll action. Continue to use Josh as an off-screener. That is a critical counter throughout the game in the series. So, it is not going to be easy for the Knicks. I don't expect any of these games to be easy. I don't expect this 11-game win streak to be, 15. It's not going to be another sweep. But I do think they have a shot to win this. And I am excited. And I hope that you are excited. And I think that's it, man. I think that's it. I did a lot of thinking about this. I watched some film, and those are just some of the thoughts I gathered from those film sessions that I think will be the biggest keys in this series. Hopefully everybody stays healthy, and hopefully the Knicks come out of this, hopefully, as NBA champions. My gosh. If that happens, you know the rule, folks. You know the deal I made with everybody. I've said it here in the show a couple of times, but I'm 31 years old. I've never drank alcohol, and I made a deal when I turned 21 that I wouldn't drink alcohol unless the Yankees won the World Series or the Knicks won the NBA Finals. We are 4 wins away from that happening. We got close in 2024 with the Yanks. Let's try it again here with the Knicks. I appreciate you all tuning in and listening, and I'll see you very soon. Go Knicks.